someone comes from that ultimately leads them to this, this world that we're in now, where we're thinking about, employability within a particular industry, the whole new collar thing, the different ways or different pathways to employment. And so your backstory is incredibly
We'll start
interesting.
with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and with that said, David, why don't, well, I guess I should say welcome to everyone to this edition of Digital Badge Academy's webcast. And in usual fashion, we're going to have David Leaser kick things off for us and interview our super interesting guest, David.
Yeah, so we're here with Sarah Boisvert, and Sarah is the I think co-founder, right, of the New Collar Network. But Sarah, you have an amazing background in technology, and it's going to be a really I think this is going to be a really great interview to talk about your background in technology and how it moved into what you're doing right now to try to change lives and improve lives through the New Collar Network and through digital badges. So thank you so much for Sarah for joining us. And I think we just kind of want to get started with a little bit of your backstory. I mean, your backstory goes back to LASIK.
hmm Well, thank you so very much for having me on. I really think the more that we can get the message out about digital badges and alternative education programs, the better our citizens will be. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I've had a lot of acceptance, I guess I'd call it, in my work because I bridge being a manufacturer and being an educator. And so the educators trust me and the manufacturers trust me and don't see me as somebody who doesn't understand what's really going on. So I had a high volume manufacturing company. My partner invented lasers that I turned into products. And so we started out selling selling the laser itself, and I quickly realized that people didn't want a laser; they wanted a hole or a mark
Yeah.
or something. And so we went into the machine tool business and built our own laser micromachining workstations and had a contract uh, manufacturing division to help me sell the machines, and worked a lot with microelectronics companies, so people like Apple, people like IBM, um, the Flat Panel Display Consortium, and more in the medical device field as products were becoming miniaturized. And so we did work with J&J and Medtronic, did a lot of work on the first coronary stents, and I sold that company in 1999.
Oh, so
Excellent.
coronary stents. I mean, that's like
Huge.
a huge thing.
Huge.
Oh
Well,
my gosh.
even lasers, I mean, so my partner, Dr. Christensen, was really at the forefront of lasers. And when he did his master's degree at MIT, his thesis was really on identifying the molecule that helped identify CO2 laser processes of how to make CO2 lasers laze. Let me re-say that. His master's at MIT, his dissertation was on identifying the molecule that really made CO2 lasers laze. And as you might know, CO2 lasers are probably one of the most frequently used lasers in manufacturing. And so we came from a real heritage of innovation in manufacturing.
So, I mean, talk about being involved with something where you're both. It's funny because I can remember more than on one occasion throughout my career telling people, that I worked around. Look, we're not trying to save lives here. We're just trying to do the work that you've been involved in. Literally was going to be saving lives, and
Yeah.
at the very least, improving the quality of someone's life. So that's
No, exactly.
yeah.
And it was really gratifying work, and seeing what changes it could make, particularly, because when we first started doing it, I mean, I was thinking, okay, the market is for people who are basically legally blind, and is, people with 2600 kind of measurement. But it was fascinating to me how parents would say, oh my God, my kid now isn't self-conscious. Because in those days, and this is, quite a while ago, in those days, you got called four eyes. Now glasses are a fashion statement, kind of like mine.
Right.
And, it wasn't cool to wear glasses. And so many people, I think, who had LASIK, it really changed their self-confidence. It changed their view of themselves, and opened up, just a whole different aspect of the benefits that I had not anticipated.
It's really interesting because I think that's where that kind of brings to where you move next, right? I mean, um, it's really about helping people, right? It's down at that level of how can I change lives using technology, and then how can I change lives with learning and skills gaps and everything else. So what did you do next?
So I was labless, and MIT's Center for Bits and Atoms took me in, and I was consulting for Neil Gershenfeld, starting out on laser micromachining, and I did some work with his graduate students. But Neil had the brainchild of these digital fabrication laboratories called Fab Labs, and Sherry Lassiter worked with him, and she ran the Fab Foundation that actually was the organization that facilitated these mostly education facilities. And so Sherry had built it with Neil into about 2,000 Fab Labs around the world. And they're all different. Some of them are in, as you would expect, community colleges. Some are in libraries. There's one at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. But many of them are in very poor places in countries like India. And I started to see, and I'd always been really concerned about workforce, of course, because I had a workforce. And on 5 continents, and I started to see really the innovation that came out of these labs, particularly the ones with the least resources. And I'd go to meetings, and not to disparage the U.S., but I'd go to meetings where the U.S. labs would talk about making Christmas decorations, and I'd go to India or Africa, and people would be talking about developing a system for water delivery because their village had no water. And what is the old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And these disadvantaged students who had no tutors, they didn't go to the best schools.
Yeah.
If they went to school at all, and the work that was going on, and I thought I was starting to think a lot about how we educate people, and particularly people in disadvantaged situations. And so I wanted to start a Fab Lab focused on workforce training in the US, and I couldn't afford to do it in Cambridge, as you could well imagine. And I had always wanted to live in Santa Fe. I had been here, I don't know, part-time, like 30 years, and I moved full-time in 2016, and to start a Fab Lab here. So I have a Fab Lab in the Higher Education Center here in town, and I started thinking about how were we going to educate people to get the kinds of jobs I knew were out there.
And what are those areas that you focused on, or or where were you and where are you now with that?
So this was 2016. So the Fab Labs kept coming to me and saying, I started our lab and started training people, and the labs kept coming to me and saying, can you help us develop a curriculum? And I had done that in when I had my company. And um, and I thought, I'm training here for the Los Alamos National Lab. That's my main employer, right? And I don't know what you need. I have no idea who your customers are for these students that we're training. And different groups use different software. They use, different machines. And so I interviewed, and I should send you guys a PDF of the first book that resulted from this. But I interviewed 200 employers on what are the skills you need for operators and technicians, because these were not these programs that I was developing were not going to result in engineers, right? They were for the people on the factory floor.
Right.
And I was particularly interested in manufacturing. So I focused on manufacturing. And it wasn't as hard as it sounds, because a lot of the people I interviewed were my former customers. And they ranged, so it was easy to get interviews, or I'd go to a conference and I knew what conferences everybody was at. So I'd go to Rapid, the SME conference, and 10 people were there. So I was able to knock out the interviews. And the result was not what I expected. I thought I was going to write a 2-year curriculum for a community college model. And of the 200 employees, 95% told me that the thing they wanted most was problem solving. Which should not be surprising to us, right?
Right.
And one of the big problems today is that the technologies are so new, and you can't call Joe in the back room who's been doing CNC for 30 years and say, Joe, how do I fix this machine? Or, what humidity level do I need for an SLS 3D printer? Because humidity is going to impact this. I mean, Joe isn't back there. And so I really saw a need there. The second thing they wanted was hands-on experience. Then they wanted digital skills. Then they wanted 3D printing. And this is in and this is in 2017.
Yeah.
And so they wanted them yesterday. Mm-hmm. They wanted these people yesterday. They were so desperate. They would hire, anybody who had any skills and then hone them. And so I thought, okay, this is not going to work. A 2-year degree is not going to help these people. And I started looking around at the programs that were out there, and I was thinking, well, let me, I had no intention of developing our own teaching platform. And I looked around, and there was no evidence in the programs that people had ever run the machines. I could tell that they had read a book or watched videos and then taken an exam, but taking an exam is not the same thing as actually running a laser cutter or running a CNC machine. And so I thought, well, that's not going to work. And then I discovered, which will be of interest to your audience because of your name, I discovered the digital badge work that had been done by IBM and Mozilla. And I started to look at this, and I thought, this is the answer. This solves the problem for the employers, the 200 employers. And I had talked to people from Fortune 10 down to startups. So it was not just the big guys, because as you probably know, 97 or 98% of manufacturing employers are small business. So SBA defines that as under 500 people. And I really covered a lot of territory, all industries. And So I started, so that would have been, I wrote the book in the end of 2017. It came out in 2018. And so in 2018, I started researching digital badges and looking at how this would work. And I happened to be talking to Rob Gorham, who at the time was the executive director of America Makes, the National 3D Printing Institute that is part of DoD's Mantech, Manufacturing USA Manufacturing USA program. And Rob called me a little while later and said, "I've got DoD money, and in this project, could we help you develop badges?" And so, being a laser girl, I probably would have done lasers first, but you have to go where your funding is. And so I worked with America Makes, which is a public-private partnership based in Youngstown, Ohio. And I worked with America Makes and developed our first digital badges that are for FDM 3D printing and SLA 3D printing, which are two different kinds. FDM is like extrusion, and so it gives people a good foundation and of course if we include CAD, and then SLA is a higher level kind of 3D printing that is more used in industry, and there's many different kinds, but it was a good start.
So essentially, you were able to leverage these because we're talking about an alternative type of educational program here, not something that's coming through the traditional higher education
Yes.
space. There was a really compelling need to have some sort of serious authoritative type of credential that these employers could look at and know that, oh, if this person has this, then I know that they've been through the gauntlet, so to speak, that they've proven their skill set. And of course, you mentioned, you weren't cranking out engineers, but clearly there was a need to crank out, fairly highly skilled talent to fill these roles in the manufacturing space. So that's a really, so did you have to go and sell the employers on the idea of these badges? Give us a little bit of insight as to kind of maybe what their initial reception was, or
that was a while back, and at first people didn't know what it was, but the minute you talked about skills, they all jump out of their seats. The minute you talk about, we are producing people who have skills when they walk out the door, that you're not going to have to spend, it would take me 6 months to a year to get somebody up to speed as an operator or a technician in my lab, or in my manufacturing company rather. And to have somebody with that where you can jumpstart it, it still takes, probably 3 or 4 months to get somebody up to speed on your processes, your particular systems, your particular machines. We try to teach something that is a machine agnostic so that people can go and work on. And I have a number of different kinds of 3D printers, for example, in my lab, so that people can get experience on a variety of platforms. So it was, at the beginning, they didn't know what it was, but they had no alternatives. The Votech schools are gone. And, the kids are coming out of a lot of programs without the hands-on skills. And so what happened was, I was finding I got great reviews on my first book, The New Collar Workforce. And it was published by a technical publisher who I used to write for their magazine. So by Photonics Media Press in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And but I was finding that people who were reaching out to me and reviewing it were parents, college presidents, CEOs of companies, engineers, And it wasn't the people I was trying to reach. I was really trying to reach the people who needed jobs. And
Yeah.
so I thought, what is wrong with this picture? And I thought, okay, I need something, since the kids don't read as much as, I certainly did as a kid. So I accidentally met a guy who worked in AR, and he had a publishing company, and he had and you could embed AR into a photograph, and then a video can pop up or an animation can pop up. And so we did a photography book, and here it is, and it has pictures of the kinds of things that we do. And I'm going to show you the kinds of things that we do in our program. And so this is a ring that was designed in CAD by a woman who never graduated from high school. She's a Mexican immigrant. She learned to design in CAD. This is let's see if I'm in the right direction. This is the mold. So we 3D print the mold on an SLA 3D printer for high resolution. And then my lights blur.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
Wow.
And that is Taos Pueblo. And there's a picture of her in here. I don't know if you can see us. I can't. Oh,
Yeah,
that's a different one. There she is. And there's AR embedded, and you use your phone, you have an app, and there's, 20 pictures in the book that have the AR, and she pops up and tells her story. Because I thought they don't want to hear some old person telling the story of how I got into this. And she tells her story, and she used to have to do that by hand. She used to have to hand carve it. And now she has the mold, and, the molds get used, but all she has to do is come into the lab and reprint her mold that is already designed. And if she wants to change it, she said, she has another version that I usually wear every day. And some people had said they wanted a smaller version. It's in CAD. So all she has to do is go in and modify the design. And it doesn't take her days. It probably takes her, hours instead of days. So, so to answer the question, so this book came out in the end of 2019. And I was speaking in Santa Fe for a conference called Dent the Future. And a guy in the audience came up to me and said, I really want to work with you. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. People say that all the time. And he said, I am the CEO of the Consumer Technology Association. And so he said, I want to put your book in my book club. And at CES in 2020, I want to have you speak. So it was launched officially, but sadly, at the beginning of COVID. So we're relaunching it. So I'm giving this talk, or I was being interviewed, and I did a book signing. It was very fun. And this woman came up to me and said, I really want to work with you. I am in the apprenticeship program at IBM. And her name is Jennifer Odo, and she lives in Ohio.
Right.
And she ended up, I had been trying to do a registered apprenticeship in New Mexico, which it was very challenging to get going because of, states often have a lot of bureaucracy. And with IBM's help, we were able to get a U.S. Department of Labor registered apprenticeship. And so the badges now were approved by the U.S. Department of Labor for a registered apprenticeship for 3D printing technicians. And so it really changed radically the acceptance in industry of the badges, because we had gone through a very rigorous review. So The America Makes it has made us industry. How do I say this? Because of our relationship with America Makes, we were industry recognized because we tested and vetted the badges, not just with our Fab Labs. We had about 10 Fab Labs at the time that we were working with. But also with companies that were members of America Makes, because they are a membership organization, and New Collar is a member. But the USDOL added quite a lot of credibility to them. So to answer your question in a long way about acceptance by industry, I think a couple of things that has happened since we've started, one of which is industry is realizing that they can get people with skills. We worked for 2 years with Los Alamos, the national lab, which is 45 minutes from us. And when I started, in order to get an entry-level job as what they call a technician, I think they call it an apprenticeship, but it's really their entry-level job. You had to have an AA degree. So you had to have an associate's degree. And now it can be an associate's degree or related experience. And so because my program is hands-on, they accept people from our program. And it's a real change in the mentality from 10 years ago even.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you mentioned there. What really stood out to me is something you said, when these employers, not understanding what a badge is, but as soon as they understood, as soon as they realized that, oh, this is about skills, people with skills,
Yep.
Then it triggered. And David and I both have seen that scenario play out so many times, right? It's if you can get people to understand, it's not really about the badge itself, it's what the badge represents,
Right.
Then it starts to click. And then of course the endorsement piece, the getting that, wow, I can't think of any higher degree of endorsement than what you've managed to achieve with that. That is such a wonderful case study in sort of the evolution of how the digital badges have become, an integral part of this program.
Yeah, and and our students, the average age is, I think, about 40. So we get people right out of high school. I've had some high school students who were like finishing up. They had like one class they had to take, and so it was perfect for them. We've had retirees. We had one guy in Santa Fe who he and his wife retired here. He was an aeronautics engineer. Obviously, 3D printing was not in the curriculum when he went to school. And he was bored and he wanted to do something. And all the jobs that he looked at, they were going to have to move. And his wife refused to move from Santa Fe, which is quite a fabulous place to live. He ended up taking our course. And I think actually he took just CAD. Maybe now I can't remember, but I know he took CAD. He took Fusion 360, which is a 3D CAD program. He only knew 2D CAD. He knew AutoCAD. And so Fusion is Autodesk's version of the same thing, but for 3D. And I think he also probably did 3D printing with us. And he ended up, they could stay in Santa Fe, and he remotely consults for companies in the aerospace industry who need CAD help for 3D printing because it's a very different animal. And so I know, consults for a company down in the southern part of the state. We're a very large state. Down in the southern part of the state, which is about 5 hours away. It's hard to get employees, down there. Very rural, not great school systems, right? Small communities where it's hard to find a job for your spouse. And so instead he's consulting for them from up here in Santa Fe. So we have these really interesting ways, and we've helped a lot of entrepreneurs who are starting businesses who don't understand prototyping, and so they're able to prototype with us, and it's really gratifying to see, you know, how we're able to help people. And I have one guy right now who's retired. Came from IT, but didn't have a great retirement plan. And you know, how do you make ends meet in today's economy when, you know, you're retired and living on Social Security and some small savings? And so he has friends in the art community here in Santa Fe who need help with design and want to go to digital fabrication, whether it's CNC or laser or whatever it is, or 3D printing. And he's going to start this little consulting business here in Santa Fe, helping the artists who are intimidated by it. We've had a lot of artists take our course and are surprised how well they can do. They surprise themselves, but it's the way we teach, because we teach in the MIT model of competency. And so it's all project based. There's no test, and you learn all those skills, and then you have to do a project that demonstrates you understand those skills.
Are some of the courses online as well? Because I think I think you'd mentioned that there's a kind of a progression as well.
There is. We are right now in the midst of a real breakthrough, I think, in scaling. So Los Alamos needs 1,500 people a year with these digital skills every year for the next 10 years. And so I live in a city of, I think, maybe 75,000 full-time people, and we're at 85,000 during tourist season when the weather's good in the summer. And I had looked at that and thought, well, how the heck am I going to train that many people? I mean, I just can't even find that many people. The state is only 2 million residents, and we're the sixth largest state in landmass. So when I say rural, we're rural, a lot of which is tribal land. And so I started to think about how can we do this online, and COVID hit, and then we really had to do it online. And so we worked with a company called 3D Print Life, an American filament provider, but they also sell educational and tabletop FDM 3D printers. And so we were drop shipping printers to people, and we put the program online, and people could go through our training on their own. And what I discovered is people get stuck. So they get stuck a little bit on our regular program, but boy, you go to the advanced CAD and the learning curve is very, very steep. And so for Fusion 360 or SolidWorks, or any of the really advanced programs, which is what we need to teach for real companies who are employing people, so particularly Los Alamos. And once they have something like Fusion 360, then, or SolidWorks, it's easy to just go between the softwares. You have to learn the vocabulary in that particular company's elements, but the basic concepts are the same. But to get started, it's a very steep learning curve. And because we have a registered apprenticeship program, of course, I have apprentices, and it's a great job for them to monitor the online program. But again, it's really limited by the number of people. And so a year ago, maybe around a year ago, America's Frontier Fund, which is an Eric Schmidt project, had put a a venture studio here in Albuquerque, and called Roadrunner. And Adam Hammer, the CEO, had found me and said, we've heard such great things about your work, and I'd really like to talk to you about how can, you come into our fold. And so I wasn't really looking for another job, but they had a group that wanted to add AI to manufacturing, and they were all computer science people, and they had no manufacturing person. So, and the state of New Mexico had put a large investment into this fund. So they really wanted to bring in a New Mexico person in the manufacturing role. And so I worked with them for a year. And after about 4 or 5 months, I was an AI skeptic because I'm a good writer. And I was like, why do I need AI? And but what I started to see was the power of having a large language model that was accurate and deep. And so we developed our own large language model. And so basically it's a database, right? It's a database, and it has the manuals of 2,500 3D printers, everything from tabletop FDM to metal printers. It has materials information on 4,500 different materials. It has curated papers. It has that are behind firewalls. So it has papers, that are from that are what do you call that when they peer reviewed? It has peer reviewed papers that are vetted, and then we tested it. So I tested it on chat first, and on chat GBT, it was about 80% accurate, but the 20% that was wrong was fundamentally wrong and would really confuse a student. Things that it would say, and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I thought that SLS 3D printers didn't use supports. How come you're telling me about supports? And I can see a beginner. I mean, I knew the answers. So this is why, I could tell where it was going off. And when we tested it on ours, about 99% accurate. And when it doesn't know the answer on ours, it doesn't do what AI people call hallucinate. It doesn't hallucinate. It basically will say, I don't know the answer to that. Can you rephrase the question? Yeah. And so it's a very, very powerful tool. And I started thinking about how if I married this LLM to my badges, now you can be online and you can say, wait a minute, I don't remember where to find X in AutoCAD. Which nav bar do I go to? And so instead of spending, as we all have in software programs, I hate changing software programs because you just can't find where the heck they put something, right? You know how to do it, you just don't know where it is. Instead of doing that or spending hours scanning the internet and getting, some guy in his garage on a YouTube video telling you wrong information. Instead, you can ask a very specific question and get the right answer and help you get unstuck. And so we're in the midst now of a raise with a VC fund in New Mexico for our new company, New Color AI, that is going to do that. We're going to marry the two. I'm figuring it'll take us about 4 months to get the platform up, and then we can expand that. But there's enormous interest in online training, as you know.
That's such a great example you gave, though, of where AI can really, really provide benefit, right? And I think that that's what most people that really appreciate the potential of AI, that's kind of how they see it. The general run-of-the-mill stuff, like I say, 80% accurate, I'm sorry, is just not. That's not going to
have a foundation. That's not going to.
Yeah, so it's the more specialized kind of language models and things like that get built. that I
Yeah.
think is, really provide the high degree of value. Everything that you've talked about is so reflective of all the things that David and I spend our time helping people understand when we talk about the value of digital credentialing and the use of digital badges, right? It's making sure they're used for things that have value, right?
Yes.
It's making sure
Yeah.
that they're transparent in terms of what they represent,
Right.
that they, reflect and amplify the integrity of those programs, that they serve the needs of both the earner and the employer, right? I mean, you've hit every single sweet spot in terms of how you've incorporated this. The story you told too about the Mexican immigrant, the young lady, that didn't have a high school diploma, but had so much potential and so much capacity to learn, and found something that they were passionate about. And thankfully, they have this alternative educational pathway and a way to be credentialed, and just opening up those kinds of opportunity. There's so many people that are in that same situation, and that's just what makes what you're doing and the use of digital badging and credentialing, I think such a strong story, and
Well,
should get a lot of people excited.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I've worked in this field a while, and I just saw a statistic that blew me away. And I was updating my deck for the VC guys, and I wanted to verify a piece of information that was in my head, but I didn't know where I got it. And I discovered this data, and it said that there are 39 million Americans under 65 who have attended college but have no degree. Yeah. And as an employer, I mean, we try not to be prejudiced, right? We try for it to be an even field. But when I get somebody who says on a resume, I attended college, to me, that means they dropped out. And now they've changed that term. I think they call it stopped out, which is a better term because people stop for various reasons. Right. But to us who have completed probably more degrees than we need, we look at it and go, oh, that person didn't finish, right? And whatever it was, and maybe it was childcare, but that's a problem for a lot of employers, right? If your kid is sick all the time. And so it makes such a difference to me that when you do a digital badge, you have a credential, and it shows to me as an employer that you finished something, that you committed to something. Yep. And okay, so maybe it was just for a year. So we do, through funding with our workforce boards and through my state legislature, we do boot camps that are 3 months, and people come every day for 5 days a week. And I'm telling you, these people are so committed. I have a kid that drives an hour and a half to come and take our class every day, each way, an hour and a half each way. And we let him do some online stuff so he doesn't have to come every day. And he's caring for his elderly father in between. We give, when we can get funding, a stipend. So the state, and this is through Santa Fe Community College's Department of Continuing Ed and Workforce Training, they have gotten state money where our students can get a $3,600 stipend. And for some people, it's all the difference. It means transportation. I live in a very rural state. To get here is half the battle. So it can be used for whatever they need, transportation, childcare, we don't ask. And so it's $1,200 a month for 3 months. And I had one guy who was a heavy equipment operator for the state of New Mexico, quit his job, took a lower paying job at like a warehouse or something at night. So he came with us all day, but the stipend allowed him to adjust his schedule and still have income, but it put him over the top so he could leave his job because there was no way he could come full time. and still have his state job. And so I think those what they call wraparound services are what we really have to start getting for our people, so that they can have those opportunities. But it's short term, it's not 4 years or 2 years. And there's a guy in the book. In the AR book, who used to say, who worked for my laser company, and he used to say, I loved math and I was so good at math, but I hated everything else in school, and I'm not a book learner. And he ended up getting in by the skin of his teeth to the community college, and this was in Maryland, and he didn't make it through a semester. So all that money's gone, right? He's already paid that semester. If you change your mind, or something happens, that money doesn't come back to you. And he dropped out, and his aunt worked for me in our, I think she was our accountant, and she got him the job as an operator, and he's now there, 20 years later. He's become an engineer, and he runs 4 laser labs for us. And at the end of the interview, he says, at any job, you can have a bad day, but how bad can it be if you get to play with lasers every day?
What a great story to end on for our interview here. If people want to find out more about what you do and like your book and all of these other things, where should they go? We'll put it up on the screen.
It's newcolornetwork.com. Color spelled like the, collar on your shirt. So right. COLLAR, newcolornetwork.com.
Thank you so much.
We'll get that
it's been a pleasure. It's a lot of fun to talk to you guys.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.